Welcome back, JDM fam. In today's video, we're going to be replacing the power steering hose and the alternator belt as well on this 7th gen 2002 Civic, because I believe this hose is leaking on the alternator belt and creating a squeal. Not to mention that the alternator belt does need to be replaced. I believe it is old. So these are a few of the things we're going to be using: engine degreaser to clean the areas and the pulleys, as well as the power steering hose, the belt for the alternator we're replacing, and we're going to be using some sockets as well as some pliers to get to the clamps on the hose, a jack stand, and the jack as well. The car is on a slight incline, so we are propping the back wheels too. So at this point, we are removing the reservoir and the hose that goes towards the firewall and draining the reservoir. Now after this, we are getting to the next hose, which is connected to the pump, and it is a lot more difficult. As you can see, I had to use my hand towards the left of the car and towards the camera more, because it is a small area and it is really hard to get to the clamp in this area. All right, so this is where we are right now. The hose is back on. I had to actually use my hand in here and just push it back on like this. And what I did was just put my hand in here and press it up. Now, to actually get that clamp on was really difficult. I had to use pliers on this side, so I actually clamped down the clamp with the pliers on this side and then used the screwdriver on the other side and just basically wedged it up a little bit at a time, and it got up there to the top. It was so hard to actually get it onto this little inlet spot. So I'm really happy that it's on right there. So the next part is to put this hose back on, which shouldn't be difficult at all. And that literally just means putting the clamp back on and putting the reservoir back on, which we cleaned up, by the way. Looks much better. Here it is right here. Now all we need to do is put the reservoir back on, clamp this on, and jack it up, change the belt out. We're gonna do that right now. Okay, so we've gotten as far as loosening the pivot bolt for the alternator, which is right there, and you can barely see it, but there's a wing nut right there and there's a nut right there. Now after that, you want to get the bolt that is right under here to the alternator. Now we are working on getting the power steering loosened, which we have to take off this wing nut. We have to loosen this wing nut, this bolt down here on the power steering pump, and there was a little piece that was holding on to this wiring harness that was blocking us from getting to this nut that we had to take off as well. I'll show you guys what it looks like right now. This little piece right here was back blocking us from getting to that nut, so we're getting that off. We have to take off the power steering belt to get to the alternator belt, so that's why I'm showing you guys the power steering belt removal. So we ended up removing the power steering pump to get to the top bolt of the alternator, and it made it a lot easier to loosen it up. So here's another look at the adjustment bolt at the bottom of the alternator and the wing nut on the left over here. You do want to make sure these are really loose, as well as the top bolt, to get the alternator to move down as much as possible and be able to get enough leeway where you can remove the belt and install the new belt. Even when the alternator was as loose as it could be, it was still pretty difficult to put the new belt on. All right, so now that everything is tightened up down there, we're tightening up the alternator right there as well, and then we're going to put the power steering back on and the belt for that. This was actually pretty difficult, and a lot of these bolts in here are really hard to get to, but if you do move the power steering, it's a lot easier to get to the alternator belt. Everything else is tightened up. We're gonna put the power steering back on, power steering pump, put the belt on, and tighten up the bolts. I'll show you exactly what we're doing when we get there. All right, so after putting the power steering pump back on, filling it up, and checking all of the bolts, as well as checking the belts and everything, we are all good. We're going to drop the car down and we're going to start it up. So the owner said that the squeal was so bad in the morning it would squeal when first started that you couldn't even hear the car run, as well as when it would sit for a little while. So let's see if it's fixed. And now the 7th Gen Civic won't be leaking power steering, we won't have to top off the fluid often, and we won't have to hear an annoying squeal every time it is started. Thank you guys for watching, thanks for making it this far. See you guys on the next video.